My daughter abandoned me 5 years ago, ever since my husband passed away. She threw my bags in the street and shouted, "My only real family is in a coffin. Go live on the street." Yesterday I won $89 million in the lottery, and the greedy one showed up. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Carol and I'm 59 years old. 5 years ago my world crumbled in a way I never thought possible. Not from my husband's death. That was devastating, yes, but it was expected. Richard had been fighting cancer for 2 years. What destroyed me wasn't losing him. It was what happened 3 days after his funeral. I can still remember every detail of that morning. The smell of coffee I hadn't touched, the pile of sympathy cards on the kitchen table that I couldn't bring myself to open, and the sound of my daughter Amelia's heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she paced around my living room like a caged animal. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice sharp in a way I'd never heard before. Amelia had always been direct, but this was different. This was cold. I was sitting in Richard's chair, wearing the same black dress from the funeral because I hadn't had the energy to change. My hands were wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. I looked up at her, my 34-year-old daughter, and for a moment I didn't recognize her. "What is it, honey?" I asked, though something in my chest already knew this conversation would hurt. She stopped pacing and turned to face me. Her eyes were hard, calculated. "You can't stay here anymore." The words hit me like a physical blow. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What do you mean?" "This house, Mom. Dad's gone. The mortgage is behind, the medical bills are piling up, and frankly, you never contributed much anyway." She crossed her arms, and I noticed she wasn't wearing the pearl necklace Richard had given her for her 21st birthday. She'd probably already sold it. I felt my throat tighten. "Amelia, I don't understand. This is my home. Our home." She let out a bitter laugh that made my skin crawl. "Your home? Mom, you lived off Dad your entire marriage. You never worked a real job, never contributed to the household income. Now that he's gone, you're just dead weight." Each word was like a knife. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. "How can you say that? I took care of your father. I took care of you. I managed this household for 32 years. Managing a household isn't a career, Mom. It's not a contribution. Dad worked himself to death providing for us while you played housewife." She walked over to the window and stared out at the street. "I've already talked to a realtor. This place needs to be sold to cover the debts." The room started spinning. I reached for the back of the chair to steady myself. "But where will I go? What about my things? My memories?" When she turned back to me, there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Something that made me realize I was looking at a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "I don't know, Mom. That's not my problem anymore." That's when I started crying. Not the gentle tears I'd shed at the funeral, but ugly, desperate sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. "Amelia, please. I just lost your father. I can't lose my home too. I can't lose you." For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her expression. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold hardness. "You should have thought about that years ago. You should have prepared for this instead of depending on Dad for everything." She walked to the front door and opened it. "I've packed your things. They're on the porch." I followed her outside in a daze. There, sitting on the porch swing where Richard and I used to drink coffee every morning, were 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. 32 years of marriage, 54 years of life, reduced to 3 containers. "This is everything," I whispered. "Everything that matters to you should fit in there." I kept Dad's important papers and anything of value. She stood in the doorway, not even stepping outside. "The realtor will be here tomorrow to assess the property." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and finally understood. This wasn't grief talking. This wasn't confusion or anger over losing her father. This was calculated. This was planned. "When did you stop loving me?" I asked. The question seemed to surprise her. For the first time that morning she hesitated. Then she straightened her shoulders and delivered the blow that would haunt me for years. "Honestly, Mom, I'm not sure I ever did. My only real family is in a coffin now. Go live on the streets for all I care." She slammed the door before I could respond. I stood there on the porch, surrounded by my meager possessions, staring at the house where I'd raised her, where I'd loved her, where I'd given her everything I had. The neighbors pretended not to watch as I loaded my suitcases into my old Honda. Mrs. Patterson from next door actually closed her blinds when I looked her way. I suppose they'd heard the shouting. I suppose they knew what was happening and chose to look away. I drove to a motel 6 miles from my former home and paid for 3 nights with the $97 I had in my purse. The room smelled like cigarettes and desperation, but it was all I could afford. That first night, lying on a bed that felt like cardboard, I kept expecting Amelia to call. I kept thinking she'd realize what she'd done and come to her senses. I imagined her pulling into the motel parking lot, tears in her eyes, begging for my forgiveness. The call never came. Instead, I lay there in the dark, replaying every moment of Amelia's childhood. Had I missed something? Had I failed her somehow? I remembered the hours I spent helping with her homework, the birthday parties I organized, the times I held her when she was sick. I remembered teaching her to drive, helping her pick out her prom dress, crying with joy at her college graduation. None of it mattered now. According to my daughter, I was nothing. Less than nothing. The woman who had thrown me away like garbage was the same little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to beg me to read her one more bedtime story, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. I cried until I had no tears left, and then I cried some more. After 3 nights at the motel, I had $14 left. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, told me about a weekly rental place across town. It wasn't much, a studio apartment above a laundromat, but it was $200 a week, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. My new home was exactly what you'd expect for that price. Water stains on the ceiling, a kitchenette with a hot plate that worked half the time, and a bathroom so small I had to step into the shower to close the door. The constant hum of washing machines below became the soundtrack to my new life. But it was shelter and I was grateful. The first thing I did was look for work. At 54, with no recent employment history, my options were limited. I'd been a full-time wife and mother, something that apparently counted for nothing in the job market. Store managers would look at my resume, if you could call it that, with barely concealed pity before telling me they'd keep my application on file. Finally, after 2 weeks of rejections, I found work cleaning office buildings at night. The pay was minimum wage, the hours were brutal, but it was something. I'd start at 11 p.m. and finish at 7 a.m., then come home to my tiny apartment and try to sleep while the laundromat customers chatted and laughed below. Those first months were the hardest of my life. Harder than watching Richard waste away. Harder than anything I'd ever experienced. The physical exhaustion was one thing, but the emotional weight was crushing. Every night, as I mopped floors and emptied trash cans, I thought about Amelia. I wondered what she was doing, whether she ever thought about me, whether she felt even a moment of regret. I tried calling her once, about 6 weeks after she'd thrown me out. I'd found her new number through directory assistance and worked up the courage to dial. My hand shook as I listened to the phone ring. Hello. Her voice was exactly the same. Amelia, it's Mom. The words came out in a rush. There was a long pause. Then, how did you get this number? I just wanted to talk. I wanted to tell you that I'm okay, that I found a place to live and, don't call me again. The line went dead. I tried calling back immediately, but the number had been disconnected. She'd changed it within minutes of hanging up on me. The message was clear. I didn't exist to her anymore. That's when I started writing letters. Long, rambling letters that I never sent, pouring out my heart to a daughter who wanted nothing to do with me. I wrote about the work I was doing, the little apartment, the way I missed her father. I wrote about memories from her childhood, hoping that if I could just find the right words, the right memory, I could somehow reach her. I kept those letters in a shoebox under my bed. Over the months, the box filled up. 47 letters to a daughter who had erased me from her life. The loneliness was the worst part. I'd been married for 32 years, had raised a child, had been surrounded by the daily noise and love of family life. Now the only conversations I had were with Mrs. Chan, the elderly Chinese woman who did her laundry every Tuesday morning while I was trying to sleep. She didn't speak much English, but she was kind. Sometimes she'd nod at me and smile, and I'd smile back, grateful for even that small human connection. Work became my escape. The office building was empty at night except for the security guard, a man named Frank who was working his way through college. He was maybe 22, young enough to be my grandson, but he treated me with respect. He'd chat with me during my breaks, telling me about his classes, his girlfriend, his plans for the future. "You remind me of my grandmother," he told me one night. "She raised 6 kids by herself after my grandfather died. Toughest woman I ever knew." I almost cried right there in front of him. It was the first compliment I'd received in months. The seasons changed. Summer became fall, became winter. I developed a routine that kept me sane. Work all night, sleep until noon, grocery shop for the cheapest foods I could find, maybe watch a movie on the small television that came with the apartment. Sundays were the hardest because that's when families did things together, and the absence of Amelia felt like a physical ache. I tried to contact her twice more that first year. Once through her old college friend Sarah, who told me Amelia had asked her not to pass along any messages. Once through Richard's brother Tom, who seemed uncomfortable even talking to me. "She says she needs space," he mumbled over the phone. "Maybe give it more time." Time. As if time would somehow make Amelia forget what she'd done to me. As if time would erase the cruelty in her voice when she told me she wasn't sure she'd ever loved me. I stopped trying after that. My second year in the apartment was easier in some ways. I'd learned to live with the loneliness, had developed coping strategies. I bought a library card and started reading again. Something I hadn't done since Amelia was small. I discovered authors I'd never heard of, lost myself in other people's stories because my own was too painful to think about. I also started volunteering at a soup kitchen on Sunday mornings. It felt good to help people, to be useful in a way that mattered. The other volunteers were kind, and slowly, very slowly, I began to make a few friends. Nothing deep, nothing that replaced the family I'd lost, but human connections that reminded me I still existed in the world. One of the volunteers, a woman named Dorothy who was about my age, had also been abandoned by her children. "They only call when they need money," she told me one Sunday as we served mashed potatoes. Been 3 years since I heard from my oldest. It was the first time I'd met someone who truly understood. We started having coffee after our volunteer shifts, sharing stories about the children who'd broken our hearts. It helped, knowing I wasn't the only mother who'd been discarded like an old appliance. But even with these small comforts, even with my growing acceptance of my new life, I never stopped thinking about Amelia. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone I'd once celebrated with her, I felt the weight of her absence. I wondered if she thought about me too, or if she truly managed to erase me from her heart completely. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that everything was about to change in a way I never could have imagined. It was a Tuesday morning in March when my life changed forever. I remember the date exactly, March 15th. I just finished my night shift and was walking to the corner store to buy milk and bread. My usual breakfast of toast and coffee before trying to sleep through the afternoon noise from the laundromat below. The store clerk was Maria, a sweet girl who dropped out of high school to help support her family. She always asked how I was doing, always treated me like I mattered. That morning she was more excited than usual. "Mrs. Carroll, the lottery is up to $89 million. Can you believe it? 89 million. She waved the newspaper at me, her eyes bright with the kind of hope that comes from dreaming about impossibilities. I smiled at her enthusiasm. "That's a lot of money, honey. You should buy a ticket. Just imagine what you could do with all that money." She gestured toward the lottery machine behind the counter. I almost said no. $2 was $2 and I counted every penny. But something in Maria's excitement was infectious, and I found myself nodding. Why not? One ticket. She printed out my numbers, quick pick, because I'd never been good with numbers anyway. I folded the small piece of paper and tucked it into my purse without looking at it. It was a silly indulgence, but Maria's smile made it worth it. "Good luck, Mrs. Carroll. Maybe tomorrow you'll be rich." I laughed and shook my head. "If I win, I'll come back and buy you something nice." "I'll hold you to that." I forgot about the ticket completely. Life went on as usual, sleeping fitfully during the day, working through the night, trying not to think too much about the emptiness that had become my constant companion. Wednesday came and went. Thursday too. It wasn't until Friday morning that I remembered the ticket at all. I was cleaning the executive offices on the 40th floor of the building where I worked, and one of the fancy wall-mounted televisions was showing the morning news. Usually, I kept the volume low so I wouldn't disturb anyone. But that morning the building was empty except for Frank and me. The news anchor was talking about the lottery drawing from the night before. The winning numbers for Thursday night's $89 million jackpot are 5, 14, 27, 31, 42, and the Powerball number is 9. The winning ticket was sold somewhere in the city, but the winner hasn't come forward yet. I stopped mopping and stared at the screen. Something about those numbers tickled the back of my mind, but I couldn't place it. Then I remembered the ticket in my purse. My hands were shaking as I dug through my bag. The ticket was crumpled at the bottom, underneath my reading glasses and a handful of coupons I'd cut from the newspaper. I smoothed it out and looked at the numbers. 5, 14, 27, 31, 42. Powerball 9. I looked at the television screen, then back at my ticket, then at the screen again. The numbers were identical. For a moment I couldn't breathe. I literally couldn't draw air into my lungs. I sat down hard in the executive chair behind the mahogany desk, still staring at the ticket. This had to be a mistake. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. People like me didn't win the lottery. People like me got thrown away by their children and spent their golden years mopping floors for minimum wage. But the numbers didn't lie. I must have sat there for 20 minutes just staring at that piece of paper. My mind kept trying to process what this meant, but it was too big, too overwhelming. $89 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. More money than Richard had made in his entire career. More money than Amelia would ever see in her lifetime. Amelia. The thought of my daughter hit me like a physical blow. For 5 years she treated me like I was worthless. Like I was nothing more than a burden she'd finally managed to discard. She'd thrown me out because I wasn't financially valuable to her anymore. Because I was dead weight. And now I was worth $89 million. I started laughing. Not happy laughter, bitter, hysterical laughter that echoed through the empty office suite. The irony was so sharp it actually hurt. All those years I'd spent wondering if I was really as worthless as Amelia had said. All those nights I'd questioned whether I'd failed as a mother, whether I deserved to be abandoned. And now, suddenly, I had more value than any of them had ever imagined. Frank found me there an hour later, still sitting in that chair, still holding the ticket. "Mrs. Morrison? You okay?" He looked worried, probably because I wasn't working and definitely because I was crying. I wiped my eyes and tried to compose myself. "Frank, can you look at something for me?" I handed him the ticket and pointed to the television, which was still showing the winning numbers on a loop. I watched his face as he compared them, saw his eyes widen, saw his mouth drop open. "Mrs. Morrison, are these the same numbers?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "You won the lottery." His voice was barely a whisper. "You actually won the lottery." Hearing him say it made it real in a way that seeing it hadn't. I had won the lottery. I was rich. Richer than I'd ever dreamed of being. "What are you going to do?" Frank asked. It was a good question. What was I going to do? The obvious answer was claim the money, quit my job, find a better place to live. But there was something else, something that had been building in my chest since the moment I'd realized what had happened. For 5 years I'd been invisible. For 5 years I'd been nothing. Amelia had made sure of that. But now I had power. Now I had options. Now I could choose how this story ended. "I don't know yet," I told Frank. "But whatever I do, I'm going to be very careful about who I tell." He nodded, understanding instinctively that this was a secret we needed to keep. "Your daughter doesn't know about this, does she?" I shook my head. Frank knew about Amelia, knew how she'd abandoned me. I told him the story one night when I was feeling particularly lonely. "Are you going to tell her?" I stared at the ticket in my hands, thinking about the last 5 years of my life. The loneliness, the poverty, the way I'd been discarded like garbage. I thought about the woman who'd told me she wasn't sure she'd ever loved me, who'd slammed the door in my face while I stood on the porch with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases. "No," I said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." The next few days were surreal. I went through the motions of my regular life, working, sleeping, shopping for groceries, while carrying the secret of my fortune like a weight in my chest. I researched what I needed to do to claim the prize, learned about taxes and legal requirements and financial advisors. I also thought about Amelia. A lot. I wondered what she was doing with her life, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about me. I wondered if she'd kept any of the furniture from my old house or if she'd sold it all. I wondered if she'd married, if I had grandchildren I'd never meet. Most of all, I wondered what she would do if she knew about the money. Part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, wanted to call her immediately. Wanted to share this incredible news with the only family I had left. Wanted to use this windfall to rebuild the relationship she destroyed. But a larger part of me, the part that had been hardened by 5 years of abandonment, wanted something else entirely. I wanted to see who my daughter really was. I wanted to know if she'd changed, if she'd grown, if she'd learned anything about love and loyalty and what it meant to be family. Or if she was still the same cold, calculating person who'd thrown her mother away like trash. I had 89 million reasons to find out. 3 weeks after claiming my prize, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, signing papers and trying to wrap my head around the reality of my new life. Sarah Martinez, the financial advisor the lottery office had recommended, was explaining investment strategies and tax implications while I nodded and pretended to understand half of what she was saying. The important thing, Mrs. Morrison, is that you don't make any major decisions right away, she was saying. Take some time to adjust. Don't tell anyone about the money until you're ready to deal with the consequences. I almost laughed at that. The consequences. She had no idea. I'd already decided to keep living in my little apartment above the laundromat for a while longer. I'd quit my cleaning job, I wasn't a fool. But I told Frank I'd gotten a small inheritance from a distant relative. Just enough to get by without working. He was happy for me, and more importantly, he believed me. The truth was I needed time to think. Time to plan. Time to decide what kind of person I wanted to be with this money, and what I wanted to do about Amelia. I didn't have to wait long to find out. It was a Saturday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks and 2 days after I'd discovered my winning ticket. I was reading a book, a luxury I'd rediscovered now that I didn't have to work nights, when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Mrs. Chun from downstairs sometimes came up to borrow laundry soap, and occasionally Frank stopped by to check on me, but they usually called first. I set down my book and went to the door, peering through the peephole. My heart stopped. Standing in the hallway outside my apartment, looking uncomfortable and slightly out of place in her expensive clothing, was Amelia. She was older than I remembered. 39 now, with new lines around her eyes and a hardness to her mouth that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But she was still beautiful, still my daughter, and seeing her face after all this time hit me like a physical blow. She knocked again, and I realized I'd been standing there frozen for several minutes. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the door and opened it. "Hello, Mom." Her voice was softer than I remembered, almost hesitant. "Amelia." I couldn't manage anything else. The woman who'd told me she wasn't sure she'd ever loved me was standing in my doorway, and I had no idea how to react. "Can I come in? Please?" I stepped back and let her enter. She looked around my tiny apartment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe pity. I tried to see the space through her eyes. The water-stained ceiling, the second-hand furniture, the hot plate I use for cooking. It was a far cry from the comfortable suburban home where I'd raised her. "This is cozy," she said, and I could hear her struggling to find something positive to say. "It's home." I closed the door and faced her, crossing my arms. "What are you doing here, Amelia?" She moved to the small window that overlooked the parking lot, her back to me. "I know it's been a long time. I know I haven't been in touch. Haven't been in touch." As if she'd been busy with work instead of deliberately cutting me out of her life. 5 years, I said quietly. "It's been 5 years, 3 months and 12 days. She turned around and I was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "You've been counting?" "Every single day." The tears spilled over, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to run to me when she was hurt. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for what I said to you, for what I did. I was grieving and angry and I took it out on you. I've regretted it every day since." I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But 5 years of abandonment had taught me to be careful with trust. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you here now?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because I've been going to therapy. Because I've been working through my issues with grief and loss and family dynamics. Because I realized what a terrible thing I did to you. Therapy. Family dynamics. The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the mirror. I've been trying to work up the courage to contact you for months, she continued. I called your old number, but it was disconnected. I drove by the house, but the new owner said they didn't have a forwarding address. It took me forever to track you down here. How did you find me? I hired a private investigator. She said it like it was no big deal, like hiring people to find your estranged mother was perfectly normal. I had to know if you were okay. I had to know if you'd forgive me. I stared at her, this woman who destroyed my life and was now asking for forgiveness. Part of me wanted to throw her out, to tell her it was too late, that some wounds never heal. But another part of me, the part that had never stopped being her mother, was desperate to believe that my daughter had truly changed. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. You didn't just hurt my feelings, Amelia. You destroyed me. You threw me away when I needed you most. I know. She moved closer, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I'm praying that maybe we can start over. Maybe we can build something new together. Start over. Build something new. The phrases hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility and pain. How's your life? I found myself asking. Are you married? Do I have grandchildren? Something crossed her face. A flash of something that might have been calculation. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I'm divorced, she said. It's been hard financially. The settlement wasn't what I hoped for. And I've been struggling to make ends meet. There it was. The first mention of money. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully. I had to sell the house. Dad's house. I'm renting a small place now, nothing fancy. She looked around my apartment again, and this time I caught the assessment in her eyes. She was comparing our situations, calculating our relative positions. What do you do for work? I'm between jobs right now. The divorce was messy. It's been hard to focus on career stuff. She sat down on my small couch without being invited, making herself comfortable. What about you? How are you managing? How was I managing? I was managing quite well, thank you. I was managing $89 million to be exact. But something told me that wasn't what she wanted to hear. I get by, I said vaguely. I don't need much. She nodded, but I could see her mind working. She was trying to figure out my financial situation, trying to assess whether I was someone who could help her or someone who would need help. Mom, I want you to know that I'm different now. I've learned so much about myself, about what's really important. I realize that family is everything. Family is all we really have in this world. Family is everything. Coming from the woman who told me my only real family was in a coffin, the irony was almost unbearable. I missed you, she continued. I missed you every single day. I missed talking to you, missed your advice, missed just knowing that you were there. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm hoping we can be a family again. As she spoke, I found myself studying her face, looking for signs of sincerity. What I saw instead was something much more complex. There was genuine emotion there, I could see that. But there was also something else. Something watchful and calculating. She was performing. Not entirely, the tears seemed real enough, but she was definitely performing. The question was, what was the performance meant to accomplish? I don't know, Amelia, I said slowly. This is a lot to process. 5 years of silence, and now you want to just pick up where we left off. Not where we left off, she said quickly. I want to start fresh. I want to make amends. I want to be the daughter you deserve. The daughter I deserve. After 5 years of abandonment, after being told she wasn't sure she'd ever loved me, now she wanted to be the daughter I deserve. I need time to think about this, I told her. She nodded eagerly. Of course. I understand. Can I give you my phone number? Can we maybe talk again soon? I watched as she wrote her number on a scrap of paper she found in her purse. Her hands were manicured. Her clothes expensive despite her claims of financial hardship. She was wearing jewelry I didn't recognize, a gold bracelet, diamond earrings. I'll call you, I said, taking the paper. She stood up, and for a moment I thought she might try to hug me. Instead, she just looked at me with those tear-filled eyes and said, Thank you, Mom. Thank you for giving me a chance. After she left, I sat in my chair for a long time, staring at the phone number she'd given me. My daughter had come back. After 5 years of silence, she'd found me and asked for forgiveness. The timing, I realized, was interesting. 3 weeks and 2 days after I'd won the lottery. 3 weeks and 2 days after I'd become one of the richest women in the state. Could be a coincidence. Probably was a coincidence. But in my experience, people like Amelia didn't believe in coincidences. They believed in opportunities. I didn't call Amelia for a week. I let her wonder, let her stew, let her think about what she wanted from me and how badly she wanted it. During that week, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I hired my own private investigator. If Amelia could hire someone to find me, I could hire someone to find out the truth about her. The investigator's name was James Murphy, a former police detective who specialized in background checks and missing persons cases. He was expensive, but I could afford expensive now. I told him I wanted to know everything about my daughter's life over the past 5 years. Her divorce, her finances, her work history, everything. Most people don't investigate their own family members, he said during our initial meeting. Most people don't get abandoned by their own family members, I replied. He understood. While I waited for his report, I called Amelia. She answered on the first ring. Mom? Oh my God, I'm so glad you called. I was starting to worry you decided not to give me a chance. I've been thinking about what you said. I told her. About starting over. And I'd like to try. But I need to be honest with you about something. There was a pause. What is it? My financial situation isn't good, Amelia. I'm barely getting by. If we're going to have a relationship, you need to know that I can't help you with your money problems. The silence that followed was telling. It lasted just a beat too long. Just long enough for me to hear her recalculating. Mom, I don't want your money, she said finally. I just want my mother back. Liar. But I played along. I'm glad to hear that. Because honestly, I was worried that's why you'd come back. After what happened with the house and everything. No, Mom. I've learned that money isn't everything. I've learned that family is what matters. Family is what matters. From the woman who'd sold my family home out from under me while I grieved my husband. I'm so relieved, I said. I was afraid you might leave again when you realized I couldn't help you financially. Never, she said firmly. I'm here for good this time. Money or no money. We made plans to have dinner that Friday. She suggested a restaurant, an expensive one, but quickly backtracked when I mentioned that my budget was tight. We settled on a diner near my apartment. The report from James Murphy arrived 2 days before our dinner date. I read it in my apartment, and with each page my heart grew colder. Amelia hadn't been entirely honest with me. She was divorced, that part was true. But the divorce hadn't left her financially struggling. According to the records Murphy had uncovered, she'd received a settlement of over $300,000, plus half the value of several properties. She wasn't renting a small place as she'd told me. She owned a 4-bedroom house in one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. More interesting was her work history. She hadn't been between jobs during the divorce. She'd been working as a real estate agent and doing quite well for herself. Her income last year had been over $100,000. The woman who'd come to my apartment claiming financial hardship was actually quite wealthy. But the most revealing part of the report was what Murphy had discovered about the timing of her visit. 3 weeks before she'd shown up at my door, she'd been in contact with someone at the state lottery office. She'd been asking questions about recent winners, about privacy laws, about how to find people who might have won large prizes. My daughter hadn't found me through months of searching and therapy and private investigators. She'd found me because she'd somehow learned I'd won the lottery. I set the report down and stared out my little window at the parking lot below. Everything made sense now. The tears, the apology, the talk about family being everything, it was all an act. She'd come back because she thought I had money. She thought she could manipulate her grieving, lonely mother into sharing her windfall. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. She'd thrown me away because she thought I was worthless. Now she was crawling back because she thought I was valuable. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd lied to me about her own financial situation. She'd painted herself as a victim, as someone who needed help, when in reality she was probably wealthier than I'd ever been before the lottery. That's when I decided to test her. Really test her. Friday evening came, and I met Amelia at the diner as planned. She looked beautiful as always, but I noticed she'd dressed down for the occasion. Jeans instead of the designer clothes she'd worn to my apartment. Simple jewelry instead of the expensive pieces I'd seen before. She was playing the part of the struggling daughter. "You look tired, Mom," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Are you eating enough? This place looks like it might be expensive." I almost laughed. The diner was the cheapest place I could think of, and she knew it. "I'm managing," I said. "Though I'll admit, things have been tight since I lost my job." Her eyes sharpened. "You lost your job? When? What happened?" "A few weeks ago. Budget cuts. They let go of all the cleaning staff." The lie came easily. "I'm looking for something else, but at my age it's not easy." "Oh, Mom." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Why didn't you tell me? I could help." "I thought you were struggling too," I said, watching her face carefully. "I am, but I could manage something small. Maybe $100 here and there. Just to help with groceries." $100. She owned a 4-bedroom house and made 6 figures a year. And she was offering me $100. The generosity was overwhelming. "That's very kind of you," I said. "But I can't take your money when you're having your own problems." We ordered dinner, the cheapest items on the menu at my insistence. As we ate, Amelia told me about her life, carefully edited version designed to make her seem like she was barely scraping by. She talked about looking for work, about cutting expenses, about how hard it was to start over after a divorce. All lies. All carefully crafted to make me feel sorry for her, while positioning herself as someone who couldn't possibly help her poor mother financially. "I've been thinking," she said over dessert, "maybe I could move closer to you. Maybe we could even live together, help each other out, live together, so she could keep an eye on me, make sure she didn't miss out on any windfall I might receive." "That's a nice thought," I said. "But honestly, I might not be able to afford this apartment much longer. I may have to find something even smaller. Maybe one of those weekly rental places." I watched her face as I said it. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Panic, maybe calculation. If I moved to a weekly rental, I'd be harder to find, harder to monitor. "Mom, you can't live in one of those places. They're terrible." She leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Listen, I've been thinking about this all week. I know I hurt you terribly, and I know I need to make amends. What if I helped you get back on your feet? Just temporarily, until you find another job." "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering. I could help with rent, utilities, groceries, whatever you need." Now we were getting to the real purpose of her visit. She wanted to invest in me, wanted to make sure I was comfortable and stable and grateful. She wanted to put me in her debt so that when my fictional lottery winnings were revealed, I'd feel obligated to share. "Amelia, that's incredibly generous, but you said yourself that money is tight for you too." "I'll manage. Family is more important than money." There it was again. Family is more important than money. From the woman who'd kicked me out of my own home because I couldn't contribute financially. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Let me take care of you for once. Let me be the daughter I should have been all along. The daughter she should have been all along. The manipulation was so smooth, so well practiced, that I might have fallen for it if I didn't know the truth about her finances. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course. But Mom, don't wait too long. I worry about you living in that place, struggling to make ends meet. You shouldn't have to live like that." "You're right," I thought. "I shouldn't have to live like that. And thanks to $89 million, I don't." After dinner, she walked me back to my apartment building. At the entrance, she hugged me. The first physical contact we'd had in 5 years. It felt hollow, calculated, like everything else about her return. "I love you, Mom," she said. "I know I haven't acted like it, but I do. I want to make things right between us." "I love you too," I said, because despite everything, despite all the lies and manipulation, part of it was still true. After she left, I went upstairs and called James Murphy. "I need you to do one more thing for me," I told him. "I need you to spread a rumor." The rumor James Murphy spread was simple and devastating. Carol Morrison, the recent lottery winner, had lost most of her winnings to a fraudulent investment scheme. Only a few $100,000 remained. and those were tied up in legal proceedings that could take years to resolve. I didn't have to wait long to see how Amelia would react to this news. She called me the next morning, her voice tight with what I now recognized as barely controlled panic. "Mom, I heard the strangest thing yesterday. Someone at the grocery store was talking about a lottery winner who got scammed. They mentioned your name. It's probably just gossip, but..." "It's not gossip," I said quietly. "It's true." The silence on the other end of the phone was profound. "Mom, are you saying, did you win the lottery?" "I won $89 million 3 months ago," I told her. "Most of it is gone now." Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, sharper, more desperate. "Why didn't you tell me? How could you not tell me something like that?" There it was. The real Amelia finally showing herself. Not the repentant daughter seeking forgiveness, but the greedy woman who'd thrown me away and now felt cheated out of her share of money she'd never earned. "You mean after you told me you didn't care if I lived on the streets?" "That's not. I was grieving, Mom. I wasn't thinking clearly. But this is different. This is family money. This affects both of us." Family money. Interesting how my lottery winnings had become family money, but my husband's house had been hers to sell. "How much is left?" she asked. "I'm not sure. My lawyers are trying to recover what they can, but they're not optimistic." Jesus Christ, Mom. How could you be so stupid? How could you fall for something like this? And there it was, the contempt, the anger, the true feeling she'd been hiding behind her performance of reconciliation. I wasn't her beloved mother she wanted to reconnect with. I was the fool who'd lost her inheritance. "I trusted the wrong people," I said. "Just like I trusted the wrong people before." She caught the implication. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm tired of people pretending to love me when they really just want something from me." "I don't want anything from you. I came back because I missed you." "Did you?" "Because according to my private investigator, you started looking for me right after you found out about the lottery win." Interesting timing. Another silence. When she spoke again, the pretense was gone completely. "You hired a private investigator to spy on me? Just like you hired one to find me. Except mine actually told me the truth. $300,000 divorce settlement. 6-figure income. 4-bedroom house in Riverside Estates. You're not struggling, Amelia. You're wealthier than I ever was before the lottery." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could practically feel her calculating her next move. "Mom, let me explain." "No. I'm done with explanations. I'm done with lies. I'm done with you. You can't be serious. I'm your daughter. My daughter died 5 years ago when she told me she wasn't sure she'd ever loved me. You're just someone who looks like her." I hung up before she could respond. She called back immediately. I didn't answer. She called 6 more times that day, then started leaving voicemails. The messages started apologetic, then became angry, then desperate, then angry again. By the end, she was screaming into my voicemail about ungrateful mothers and family loyalty, and how I owed her for everything she'd suffered. It was exactly what I'd expected. The next day, she showed up at my apartment building. I watched from my window as she pounded on the door downstairs, as she screamed my name, as she demanded that someone let her in. Mrs. Chun pretended not to understand English. The other tenants avoided eye contact and hurried past. Eventually, she gave up and left. That evening, I called my real lawyer. Not the fictional one I told Amelia about, but Sarah Martinez, who was managing my actual fortune. "I want to disappear," I told her. "What do you mean?" "I mean I want to start over completely. New identity, new life, new everything. Can you arrange that?" She was quiet for a moment. "It's not easy, but it's possible. Especially with your resources." "May I ask why?" "I need to get away from someone who's never going to stop trying to find me. Someone who thinks I owe them something I'll never owe them." Sarah understood. She'd dealt with lottery winners before, knew how money could bring out the worst in people, even family members. "Where do you want to go?" I thought about it. Where did a 59-year-old woman with $89 million go to start over? "Somewhere warm," I said finally. "Somewhere I can be anonymous. Somewhere I can build a life that's actually mine." 3 months later, I was sitting on a beach in North Carolina, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic Ocean. My name was now Catherine Williams. I had a beautiful house overlooking the water, a circle of friends who knew me as a retired teacher who'd moved south for her health, and a peace I hadn't felt in decades. I volunteered at a local literacy center, teaching adults to read. I'd joined a book club and a gardening group. I'd learned to paint watercolors and had started taking piano lessons, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was taking care of everyone else. For the first time in my adult life, I was living entirely for myself. I thought about Amelia sometimes. I wondered if she was still looking for me, still trying to track down the money she thought she deserved. I wondered if she'd learned anything from losing me twice, or if she was still the same cold, calculating person who saw relationships as transactions. But I didn't wonder very much, and I didn't wonder very often. I'd given her 39 years of my life, first as her mother, then as her victim. I wasn't giving her any more. One morning, about 6 months after I'd moved to North Carolina, I was having coffee with my friend Margaret, a widow who'd become like a sister to me. She was telling me about her daughter, who called every week and visited every month, who included Margaret in family holidays and major decisions. "You're so lucky to have her," I said. Margaret smiled. "I am. But you know what? I think she's the lucky one. She has a mother who loves her unconditionally, who's always there for her, who would do anything to protect her happiness. That's worth more than money, don't you think?" I nodded, thinking about the daughter I'd raised, the one who'd thrown me away, the one who'd come crawling back only when she thought I could benefit her financially. "Yes," I said. "That's worth everything." That afternoon I walked along the beach, feeling the sand between my toes and the sun on my face. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who'd sacrificed everything for people who didn't appreciate it, who'd lived in poverty and loneliness because she'd been discarded by the person she'd loved most. That woman was gone now. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that love without respect is worthless, that family without loyalty is just shared DNA, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away. I pulled out my phone and deleted the last contact I had from my old life, Amelia's number, which I'd kept even though I'd never planned to use it. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow I would wake up in my beautiful house, have coffee on my deck, maybe paint another watercolor or meet friends for lunch. Tomorrow and every day after that would be entirely my own. And for the first time in 59 years that felt like enough.